Wordsworth's most famous poem, A Few Lines Composed Above Tintern Abbey, from 1798, the final poem in his collaboration with Coleridge, also from 1798, called Lyrical Ballads. Tintern Abbey is often seen as an early expression of what we might call the religion of Wordsworth. His feeling that we look to the natural world, if we look to the natural world with sufficient passion and imagination, it will be the moral guide to all of our being. It will be the nurse and the anchor of our soul. But the poem, in fact, is less a celebration of a clear argument concerning the natural world. It is instead a dramatization of Wordsworth's doubt in those conclusions that he seems to articulate about the natural world. Famously, the poem begins with his speaker standing over the medieval ruin, Tintern Abbey, remembering what it was like to be there 5 years earlier. 5 years ago, 5 summers and 5 long winters, I've been gone from here, and it's still beautiful. And in fact, even though I've been absent from it physically, I've not been absent from it emotionally or spiritually. And he goes on to list the various virtues that he's gleaned from this landscape over the past 5 years. He has often felt elevated by this landscape when he would otherwise be depressed in London. He feels that his experiences in this landscape have given him a kind of moral competence that he would not have had otherwise. But ultimately he feels this. He feels that sometimes while in a mood of heaviness and weariness, a feeling of confusion, to remember this landscape, he is lightened, and he feels that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Wow, that is Wordsworth at his best. The feeling that this connection with the natural world through memory gives us an insight into how the whole world works, into the very life of things, and an insight that charges us with power. Well, why not end the poem there? Well, look what comes next. If this be but a vain belief, yet oh, how often darkness amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye, thou wanderer through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee. So there's a feeling here that, well, maybe what I've just laid out, this idea that this landscape gives me the deep power of harmony, the deep power of joy, and allows me to see into the life of things, well, maybe that's a vain belief. The fact that he says, if this is a vain belief, if this be but a vain belief, suggests that it might be a vain belief. So he's undercut, to some extent, the commitment to his affirmations. And then look what happens. He says, and now, 5 years later, now here, standing looking at Tintern Abbey, with gleams of half-extinguished thought and many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. So now he's going to work himself up into another celebration of nature, but he does so with only half-extinguished thoughts and with perplexity. So he admits that he's confused, that he's not clear, so the very basis for what will come next has to be cast in doubt to some extent. Well, what does come next? Well, he talks about what it was like when he was in Tintern Abbey 5 years ago, and he felt aching joy and dizzy rapture, running through the natural world with no self-consciousness whatsoever. But now he cannot feel the aching joy and dizzy rapture. But you know what? It doesn't matter, or so he says. I don't faint for lacking aching joy and dizzy rapture, nor do I murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss I would believe abundant recompense. Not for such loss there is abundant recompense, but for such loss I believe there might be abundant recompense. What is the abundant recompense? What makes up for the lack of aching joy and dizzy rapture? Well, he goes on to tell us this in the ensuing lines, but it's worth noting that abundant recompense is almost an oxymoron. Recompense suggests an equation. I work X number of hours, you recompense me X number of dollars. But abundance suggests something that is beyond what is needed, beyond what is required. So abundant recompense is a wonky phrase. And of course, I think it highlights the fact that Wordsworth's speaker doesn't quite buy that it's okay not to have aching joy and dizzy rapture. Well, he goes on to talk about what he now has that he didn't have 5 years ago, and that's a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused. And a feeling that now nature is the anchor of his purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of his heart, and the soul of all his moral being. Why not stop the poem there? There's yet another hesitation, another moment where he goes, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't true. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. This suggests that, well, maybe I could be taught another way. If I were not thus taught and could be taught another way, I still wouldn't feel so terrible. So on at least 3 occasions, the poet has stopped himself right after a great affirmation and expressed doubt, confusion, hesitation. And the poem ends with him looking to his sister Dorothy and imagining that she will experience the landscape as he has. But look at this. He says, nor perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together. There's a suggestion here that he might die soon. I might not be around much longer to be in your presence and be witness to this vision of the natural world. So what the poem is it's a dramatization of a man's desperate attempt to find some meaning in the natural world and also to find some meaning in his past. You'll notice that he alludes to Hamlet in the first moment where he says, oh, if this be but a vain belief. He says, let me go back to it because it's very important, because what you realize is that in some ways this poem is Wordsworth's version of a Shakespearean soliloquy, a kind of Hamlet-like soliloquy, even though someone is there expressing his doubt. Here's what he says, if this be but a vain belief, when the fretful, unprofitable stir of the world is present. So, of course, we think of Hamlet's first soliloquy, talking about how the world is so unprofitable. So, to me, this makes Wordsworth's first great poem even more powerful than if I saw it as a nature religion, because it shows a man who is honestly seeking for some sort of worldview that will connect him to the landscape, will connect him to his past, and will connect him to his sister. But he's not willing to settle for simply an enthusiastic affirmation. He's constantly saying, is that right? Is that right? Is that right? What if it's that way? What if it's that way? What if it's that way? So the poem is less about something and more an enactment of a process of trying to make sense of the world.